Um, what if I told you that the sudden, like, blinding flash of intense rage you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic actually has absolutely nothing to do with the other
It's a
driver?
wild thought, right?
It really is. Like, what if that anger, that horrible feeling of being completely overwhelmed by your morning, is actually just a symptom of microscopic energy crisis happening inside your cells at that exact second?
I mean, it completely flips our understanding of human emotion upside down. We tend to view our bad moods or, our stressful reactions as purely psychological events.
Yeah, almost like a personal failing or a character flaw.
Exactly. But when you look closely at the underlying mechanics, you realize that your towering frustration at a red light might simply be your neurons screaming that they are out of fuel.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Oh.
Because to truly grasp what that means,
Mm.
we need to ground it in a reality that you listening right now probably know intimately well.
Oh, definitely. We've all had those mornings.
Right. So let's paint a picture of a typical morning. It's early. The room is still pitch black, filled with that heavy, oppressive dark that feels almost like solid against your skin. And then it happens.
The alarm clock.
Yes, the alarm clock goes off. And it's not a gentle, gradual chime, but a jarring, electric, aggressive buzz that practically vibrates right through your skull. You jolt awake.
And biologically speaking, your nervous system hasn't just woken up. It has been violently launched into a state of emergency.
It's a total 5-alarm fire before you've even opened your eyes.
Right.
So you throw off the warm covers, and the very first thing you experience is the shock of the cold tile floor against your bare feet.
The worst.
It sends this unpleasant shiver all the way up your spine. You stumble into the kitchen, desperately needing caffeine to function, only to find the coffee that was left on the burner too long yesterday.
And you drink it anyway.
Of course you do. You pour a mug, take a sip, and it's undeniably bitter, acrid. It burns the back of your throat. But you simply have to get out the door.
Well, what's happening there is you are accumulating micro-stressors. Each one of these small events is quietly demanding resources from your body.
Right. And then comes the grand finale of this terrible morning routine, the commute.
The ultimate stress test.
Exactly. You are sitting in gridlock traffic. The sky outside is a dull, flat gray. You are gripping the steering wheel so tightly that your knuckles are turning a translucent white.
You can probably feel the cold, hard leather digging into the palms of your hands.
Yeah, and your shoulders are creeping steadily up towards your ears, tight as coiled springs. And right there, in that stagnant, sealed environment of your car, the internal monologue starts playing on an endless, looping track.
And it usually sounds something like a relentless interrogation of your own life choices,
Oh, totally. It sounds like, why does this always happen to me? Why is it every single time I'm in a hurry, I hit every single red light in this city? Today's going to be a complete and utter disaster.
And you just sit there stewing in it.
We have all been there. It is a profoundly universal human frustration. But experiencing that morning routine brings up a monumental question. Why do we get stuck in these negative loops?
That is the big question.
Right. Like, are we just helpless passengers trapped inside our own bodies, doomed to repeat these stressful, toxic reactions over and over simply because of how we are wired?
I mean, are we at the mercy of our biology? That is the fundamental question of human existence. Are we the active architects of our daily experience, or are we just passively reacting to the invisible chemical storms raging inside our heads?
So today, we're going to embark on an in-depth exploration to map out exactly that mysterious territory.
Yes, we are going to look at the fascinating, often misunderstood intersection between our biological hardware, the physical brain matter, the intricate cells, the neurochemistry.
And our mental software, right. Our conscious thoughts, our deeply held beliefs, and that running internal monologue.
Exactly. Our mission is to uncover how we can stop living on this exhausting, stressful autopilot and actually learn the mechanics of how to actively rewrite the code of our daily reality.
But before we can even entertain the idea of changing our minds or rewriting our mental software, we have to look incredibly closely at the physical constraints of the machine we are currently operating, the hardware.
Because we need to know if we actually have a choice in how we behave, right?
Uh.
Or if everything from our patience in traffic to our deepest moral convictions is just a byproduct of chemistry and anatomy.
Right. And to really understand the sheer terrifying power of the biological blueprint, we have to travel back to the mid-19th century.
Oh, this is one of the most famous paradigm-shifting medical anomalies in recorded history.
It really is. It involves a young railway foreman. He was a man in his mid-20s working on the massive, grueling expansion of the railroad in a very rugged, rocky part of the country.
And by all accounts, he was known to everyone around him, his bosses, his crew, his family, as a remarkably kind, responsible, and uniquely even-tempered man.
He was the guy you trusted, the rock of his community. He was the one who mediated disputes, who showed up on time, who handled the heaviest responsibilities with just this calm demeanor.
A model citizen in every respect. Now, part of his daily job involved clearing massive ancient boulders out of the path of the newly proposed tracks.
Which was incredibly dangerous work.
Highly dangerous.
Yeah.
The standard procedure for this at the time required absolute precision. You had to use heavy tools to drill a deep, narrow hole straight down into the solid rock. Then you would fill that hole about halfway with highly explosive dynamite powder.
Okay, sounds risky already.
It gets worse. You insert a long fuse and carefully pour loose sand over the top of the explosive. The final, most perilous step was to use a specialized tool called a tamping iron, a heavy, pointed iron rod weighing over 13 pounds and measuring more than 3 feet long to pack the sand down tight.
Just listening to the mechanics of that process makes my palms sweat.
Oh, I know. The sand acted as a plug, ensuring that when the fuse was lit, the force of the explosion would be directed entirely downward into the rock, shattering it, rather than just blowing harmlessly out the top of the hole.
So you are repeatedly striking a heavy iron rod directly against rock, just inches away from highly volatile explosives. There is an enormous margin for catastrophic error there.
And tragically, that error occurred in a fraction of a second. One afternoon, while working on a particularly stubborn section of rock, he was momentarily distracted. He turned his head slightly to speak to his man over his right shoulder.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Without looking, he struck the heavy iron rod down into the hole. But in a tragic lapse of communication, his assistant hadn't poured the protective layer of sand in yet.
Oh, wow. So it was just iron on rock.
Exactly. The iron rod struck the bare, flinty rock right next to the explosive powder. It created a single, fatal spark.
The absolute nightmare scenario.
The spark ignited the dynamite instantly. The concussive force of the explosion shot that heavy iron rod out of the hole like a cannonball.
That is terrifying.
And because of the angle of his head, the rod entered his face just under his left cheekbone. It passed completely behind his left eye, tore straight upward through the frontal lobes of his brain, and exited violently out the top of his skull.
Good grief.
It landed several dozen feet away, literally smeared with blood and physical brain matter.
It is genuinely a medical miracle that he didn't die on the spot. I mean, the visceral horror of that image, a 13-pound iron rod shooting straight through your skull and landing behind you.
It completely shocked the medical establishment of the time that he survived the initial trauma. It shocked them even more that he survived the severe, inevitable brain infections that followed in the days before antibiotics.
Right, because this was the 1800s.
Exactly. But against all odds, he did survive. Physically, his recovery was remarkable. He could walk perfectly fine. He could talk normally. His memories of his past were completely intact.
Okay, but here's where this story shifts from an incredible medical survival tale to a profound, unsettling revelation about human nature. He was simply no longer the same man.
Right. The physical hardware was damaged, so the software he was running completely glitched out.
It was a total, absolute rewrite of his personality. The kind, responsible, beloved foreman vanished. In his place was a man who was shockingly impulsive, profoundly childish, and highly aggressive.
He became prone to these terrifying fits of rage over the smallest inconveniences.
Yeah, and he began using terrible creative profanity in public, which he had never done before in his life. He became entirely incapable of sticking to any plans for the future. He would make a plan and just abandon it 5 minutes later.
He quickly lost his job because he couldn't manage his men anymore. He alienated his closest friends. The people who knew him best famously noted that the balance between his intellectual faculties and his animal propensities had been completely destroyed.
They said he was, quite simply, no longer himself.
And that is deeply unsettling when you pause to think about the implications. We like to believe that our personality, our restraint, our kindness, these are matters of the soul, or at least of deep ingrained character.
But this story suggests that character is highly dependent on having an intact skull.
It proved undeniably that our social behavior, our capacity for emotional restraint, and our very moral compass are deeply rooted in physical brain matter, specifically the frontal lobes.
Because the frontal lobe acts as the brakes, right?
Exactly. It's the sophisticated, regulating brakes for the more primitive emotional parts of our brain, like the limbic system. When you physically destroy that specific part of the frontal lobe with an iron rod, you literally destroy the physical machinery that allows a human being to regulate their impulses.
It makes you look in the mirror and wonder, like, how much of my patience, my work ethic, my identity is just the result of a healthy frontal lobe?
Yeah.
If I bump my head in just the wrong way, would I become a completely different person?
It's a scary thought.
It is. But the fascinating thing is, it doesn't just stop at catastrophic, traumatic brain injuries. This biological blueprint dictates everyday behaviors that we assume are entirely based on free will or morality.
Which is a perfect segue into looking at the animal kingdom.
Yes, I am obsessed with the research on the voles because this absolutely blew my mind when I first read about it.
Oh, the vole research is one of the most elegant, unarguable illustrations of biological determinism we have ever discovered.
So, for anyone unfamiliar, we are looking at two very closely related species of these small, field mouse-like creatures. First, you have the prairie voles.
Right.
If you observe prairie voles in the wild, they look like the ultimate idealized family unit. They are fiercely, devotedly monogamous. When a male prairie vole finds a mate, they bond for life. He becomes incredibly protective of his partner.
And when they have pups, he helps build the intricate nest. He physically huddles over the babies to keep them warm when the mother's away, and he actively, enthusiastically shares in all the exhausting parenting duties.
They exhibit what we humans, projecting our own values, would categorize as highly moral, responsible, and deeply loving behavior.
Right. We look at the prairie vole and think, what a good guy.
But then you look at their very close genetic cousins, the mountain voles. The mountain voles live entirely different lives. They are libertines. They are entirely solitary and indifferent.
A male mountain vole will mate with a female and then immediately, permanently vanish into the grass.
Yeah. He has zero interest in bonding with her, zero interest in building a nest. And if he happens to wander past his own biological pups weeks later, he doesn't even recognize them. He completely ignores them.
Now, from a purely observational standpoint, you might think the prairie vole has better character or stronger family values than the deadbeat mountain vole.
But the reality of their behavior is completely hidden at the microscopic neurochemical level. The profound difference between the devoted, loving father and the indifferent wandering male comes down entirely to the density of specific neurohormone receptors in the brain.
We were talking specifically about the receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin.
And these are the famous chemicals we always hear associated with human bonding, trust, maternal instincts, and connection.
They are the biochemical glue of social connection. Now, think of a receptor like a highly specific lock on the outside of a cell, and the neurohormone is the key.
Okay, locks and keys.
Right. The prairie voles are born with a dense, incredibly rich, sprawling network of these specific locks in the reward centers of their brains. When a prairie vole mates, his brain is flooded with oxytocin and vasopressin.
So the keys flood the system.
Yes. These chemical keys find millions of available locks, bind to them, and trigger a massive, powerful, enduring feeling of internal reward and deep attachment. His brain physically wires the presence of his mate to an overwhelming sense of pleasure and safety.
But the mountain voles simply lack that dense network of locks. They have very few receptors.
Exactly. When they mate, the chemicals are released, but they have nowhere to bind. The signal dissipates. They physically cannot process the bonding chemicals in a way that creates attachment.
So it isn't a moral choice to abandon the family. It is a structural, anatomical inability to bond.
And researchers didn't just observe this, they proved it by actively manipulating the biology.
The experimental proof is staggering. You take a famously devoted prairie vole, a male who is already bonded with a mate, and you administer a very specific pharmaceutical substance that chemically blocks those oxytocin and vasopressin receptors.
Essentially putting glue in the lock so the keys can't fit.
Right. His behavior changes practically overnight. The dedicated nesting father turns into a neglectful wandering mountain vole. He stops defending the nest. He loses interest in his mate.
His biology was chemically altered, and his morality, his devotion, completely vanished with it.
It is wild to think about. A chemical compound can erase love. And you can see this dynamic play out with other highly social animals too. Look at the research done on meerkats in the Kalahari Desert.
Oh, the meerkats. That's a fascinating example.
Meerkats are already highly cooperative animals. I mean, they have to be to survive in such a harsh environment. They live in big, complex social groups. They take turns standing guard on high mounds to watch for eagles or jackals. They share food.
But scientists conducted an experiment where they safely captured certain meerkats and gave them an extra sustained dose of oxytocin.
And the results of that extra dosing were fascinating, but they also revealed the dangerous edge of biological imperatives.
They became hyper-cooperative. They turned into the ultimate obsessive team players.
Yeah, they spent almost all their waking hours furiously digging communal burrows for the group, standing guard for predators for hours on end without taking a break, and bringing every scrap of food they found to the young pups of the group.
But there was a massive life-threatening cost to this behavior. They became so chemically fixated on serving the group that they literally forgot to forage for themselves. Their basic, fundamental self-interest and survival instinct was completely overridden by the artificial chemical imperative to serve the collective. They would have starved to death if the researchers hadn't intervened.
It perfectly, vividly illustrates that these powerful neurochemicals are not just gentle, subtle nudges in our behavior. They can be overwhelming, blinding biological directives that can override even the most primal instinct to keep oneself alive.
So we have an iron rod destroying a man's personality by damaging his frontal lobe, and we have a lack of microscopic receptors destroying family loyalty in rodents.
It really paints a stark, heavy picture of biological determinism. The hardware seems to dictate everything. But what happens when human beings, in our infinite hubris, try to fight that biology?
Right. What happens when a scientist says, no, the hardware doesn't actually matter, human beings are entirely malleable, and we can just program the software however we want through social conditioning?
That specific line of questioning leads us to one of the darkest, most tragic, and most ethically fraught chapters in the history of medical science. It took place in the late 1960s, involving a pair of twin boys.
To understand how this happened, you have to understand the prevailing psychological dogma of the era. At this time, a very popular, widely accepted theory in academia was the blank slate theory.
Which argued what, exactly?
The core premise was that human beings are born completely neutral. It argued that we have no innate gender behaviors, no deep biological predispositions, and that everything we eventually become, our preferences, our identity, our personality, is entirely the result of how we are raised, how our parents treat us, and how society conditions us.
It was the absolute extreme of the nurture over nature argument. The hardware is just an empty hard drive waiting for society to install the operating system.
Exactly. Now, these twin boys were born perfectly healthy, but at around 8 months old, one of the twins suffered a horrific, irreversible accident during what should have been a routine medical circumcision procedure.
Oh, that is so awful.
His anatomy was severely and permanently damaged by an electrical cauterizing tool. The parents were understandably devastated, terrified for their son's future, and desperate for any kind of solution.
And they eventually sought the counsel of a very prominent, highly respected, world-renowned psychologist at a major research hospital who was a leading vocal proponent of this blank slate theory.
And the advice this expert gave to the grieving parents was, in hindsight, absolutely shocking.
What did he tell them?
He convinced the parents that the best, most humane, and most scientifically sound path forward was to completely change the child's gender assignment.
Just like that.
Yes. He firmly theorized that if they surgically altered the infant boy to appear female, gave him a female name, dressed him exclusively in girls' clothing, and strictly, consistently raised him as a girl from that moment forward, the child would simply adapt.
Because he believed it was all learned behavior.
Right. The child would grow up to be a perfectly well-adjusted, typical female. He believed with absolute certainty that the underlying biological truth, the chromosomal reality of the child, could simply be conditioned away by a controlled environment.
He literally treated the child like a blank slate. He thought he could just wipe the hard drive and install brand new software, and the machine wouldn't know the difference. But the hardware violently, tragically rejected it.
The psychological suffering this child endured is almost unimaginable. From a very young age, despite the dresses, despite the female name, despite the intense, constant psychological pressure from his parents and doctors to conform to this imposed identity, the child fundamentally, viscerally rejected the conditioning.
As a toddler, he would tear off the frilly dresses. He constantly exhibited rough, typical male play patterns. He refused to play with dolls.
As he grew older, he felt a profound, agonizing, inexplicable alienation from the body and the identity that had been forced upon him. He didn't know the truth of his medical history, but his biology knew, and his brain was screaming that something was terribly wrong.
The psychological toll of being told every single day by everyone you trust that you are something you implicitly, biologically know you are not. It's devastating. It creates an unbridgeable cognitive dissonance.
It was a horrific failure of medical ethics, driven by sheer scientific arrogance. The psychologist continued to publish papers claiming the case was a massive success, even as the child was spiraling into deep depression.
And the truth eventually came out, right?
Yes. Eventually, when the child reached his early teens and was deeply suicidal, the parents, overcome with guilt, finally confessed the truth of what had happened in infancy.
And his reaction was immediate.
Upon hearing the truth, the child immediately, without hesitation, requinted his male identity. He took a male name, sought multiple painful medical treatments to masculinize his body, eventually married a woman, and became a stepfather.
But the trauma of that forced conditioning, of having his deep biological truth denied and gaslit for his entire childhood, left massive, unhealable psychological scars.
He struggled immensely with severe depression for his entire adult life and tragically took his own life in his late 30s.
It is a profoundly heartbreaking story, but it serves as this monumental, undeniable, tragic proof that we are not, and never have been, blank slates. You cannot simply condition away deep genetic and biological truths with words and dresses. The hardware is real, it is powerful, and it demands to be acknowledged.
It proves that our biology is not just a polite suggestion, it is the foundational bedrock of who we are. The operating system must be compatible with the hardware.
Okay, hold on. I'm having a really hard time buying the ultimate conclusion of all this. I hear these stories, and they are incredibly compelling. But if I am listening to this in my car right now, if my brain structure completely dictates my impulse control like the railway worker, if the density of my receptors dictates my loyalty like the voles, and if my genetics dictate my fundamental identity like that tragic twin, where does free will actually live?
That is the big pushback.
Are we just highly complex meerkats? Are we just walking bags of water and protein, waiting for our neurochemicals to blindly dictate our next move? Is there any actual room for choice in the human experience?
That is the essential defining tension of neuroscience. It is incredibly easy to look at these extreme historical examples and feel a sudden, crushing sense of nihilism, a sense that we are trapped in a biological prison, merely observing our lives rather than living them.
Right. It feels very hopeless.
But we have to remember a crucial distinction. While the hardware is very real and very powerful, it is not a static prison. The brain is not a piece of architecture carved in granite and unchangeable.
It's adaptable.
Exactly. It is a highly dynamic, living, breathing, constantly regenerating ecosystem. It responds to its environment. It adapts. It physically changes its own structure based on how we use it. We are constrained by the parameters of our biology, absolutely, but we are not entirely defined by it.
So we have this physical, adaptable ecosystem inside our skulls.
Yeah.
But what actually powers it? If the brain is the physical hardware, it needs a power source. It needs an engine to run the complex processing.
And exploring that power source transitions us away from the static anatomy of the brain and into the fluid energy of the brain, which brings us to a really revolutionary new framework in medicine.
Yes, we are shifting our focus now from the structural components, the frontal lobes and the microscopic receptors, to the metabolic engine that drives every single function within those cells.
We are talking about the unified metabolic theory of mental health.
This feels like a massive paradigm shift. Because for decades, society and medicine have looked at mental distress, whether it's the everyday brain fog that makes it hard to work, chronic anxiety that keeps you up at night, or even severe psychiatric conditions as purely psychological issues.
Right. We talk about chemical imbalances or unresolved childhood trauma.
But this theory reframes all of it. It suggests that almost all mental distress can actually be viewed as a metabolic disorder of the brain.
It fundamentally changes the entire conversation around how we heal. To understand this theory, we have to look closely at a tiny organelle inside our cells called mitochondria.
Mitochondria. Anyone who took high school biology remembers the classic phrase, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Right, that is the classic textbook definition. And it's true as far as it goes. They take the food we eat, the glucose and fats and the oxygen we breathe, and through a complex cycle, they turn it into ATP.
ATP, the energy currency.
Yes, adenosine triphosphate. It is the fundamental energetic currency of the cell. Every time a neuron fires, every time a muscle twitches, it costs ATP. But calling mitochondria just powerhouses or batteries is a massive, almost insulting understatement.
Really? Why is that?
It is like calling the conductor of a symphony orchestra just a guy waving a wooden stick. Mitochondria are incredibly complex, highly sensitive traffic directors and environmental sensors.
What do you mean by traffic directors? How does a microscopic battery direct traffic?
They don't just blindly produce energy, they actively decide how that energy should be used and where it needs to go based on what is happening around them.
So they're assessing the situation.
Constantly. They are constantly monitoring the environment inside and outside the cell for threats. If they sense a viral infection, they instantly redirect cellular energy away from normal functioning and route it toward the immune response.
Oh, wow.
If they sense chronic, severe psychological stress, they alter the production of stress hormones. They manage systemic inflammation. They even regulate the production of crucial neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. They are the master regulators of cellular health and survival.
So if the mitochondria are struggling, if they are damaged or sensing too many threats, the whole system starts to glitch.
Precisely.
How does that biological glitch translate into the subjective symptoms of mental distress that you and I actually experience on a Tuesday afternoon?
Well, think about what happens when that cellular engine simply isn't producing enough ATP. If the mitochondria in your brain are sluggish, damaged by poor diet, or overwhelmed by chronic stress, they simply cannot meet the massive energy demands of your neurons.
Because the brain is an energy hog, right?
Exactly. It uses 20% of your body's energy despite being only 2% of your weight. The result of this energy deficit is a system-wide slowdown.
And how does that feel to us?
This manifests physically and mentally as profound exhaustion, a total lack of motivation, thick brain fog where you can't find the right words, and the heavy, lethargic, hopeless symptoms we typically associate with depression.
So your brain is literally, physically experiencing an energy crisis.
Yeah.
It is shutting down non-essential functions to survive.
It's basically running in low power mode, just trying to keep the lights on.
But wait, what about the opposite end of the spectrum? What about acute anxiety or a panic attack or mania? That doesn't feel like low energy. That feels like way too much energy. My heart is racing. My thoughts are spinning 1,000 miles an hour. I can't sit still. How does a theory about cellular metabolism explain that hyperactive state?
That is where the theory gets even more fascinating and nuanced. What's fascinating here is that sometimes when cells are chronically stressed, inflamed, or damaged over a long period, they become hyperexcitable. Their internal regulatory mechanisms are broken.
So they can't control the flow.
Right. So when the mitochondria suddenly manage to produce a burst of ATP energy, these damaged cells can't handle the influx gracefully. They misfire. They fire too rapidly, too intensely, and at completely the wrong times without any actual external stimulus demanding that response.
Like an engine revving wildly out of control because the internal limits are broken.
Exactly. That chaotic, hyper-excitable cellular misfiring is what produces the subjective physical sensations of severe anxiety, hypervigilance, paranoia, and mania. The energy is absolutely there, but it is uncoordinated, chaotic, and destructive.
The cells are essentially panicking because they cannot regulate the flow of their own power. This makes so much intuitive sense when you relate it back to everyday life. Let's go right back to that terrible morning commute we talked about at the beginning. So you had a terrible night of sleep. You tossed and turned, maybe you drank a couple of glasses of wine late the night before, or you've been eating heavily processed, terrible food all week.
The standard modern lifestyle, unfortunately.
Yeah. You wake up feeling this profound, heavy sense of irritability and a vague sense of impending doom. Normally, we just brush that off. We say, oh, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I'm just in a bad mood today.
But that is not just an abstract psychological bad mood. Right now, as you are sitting in that traffic, you are experiencing a very real, very physical, temporary metabolic crisis inside the cells of your brain.
Yes. You have deprived your mitochondria of the deep rest, the oxygen, and the quality nutrients they desperately need to clear out cellular waste and repair themselves overnight. So they are struggling.
They are failing to produce clean ATP energy. They are triggering systemic inflammatory responses throughout your body. And your subjective, emotional experience of that microscopic cellular struggle is feeling angry at the guy in the SUV next to you.
This changes everything about how we view self-care. This is why lifestyle factors are not just nice-to-haves or superficial wellness trends for your mental health. They are the foundational requirements of a functioning brain.
Your sleep quality, your daily exposure to natural sunlight, which regulates circadian rhythms, your nutrition, the chronic stress of your job, every single one of these physical factors directly, biologically impacts how efficiently your mitochondria can produce energy.
You simply cannot have a resilient, healthy mind if you have a metabolically degraded, starving brain.
It is exactly like trying to run a brand new high-end smartphone on a degraded 5-year-old battery.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy. You know exactly what that feels like. You try to open a complex app, maybe trying to use the GPS and play music at the same time, and the screen just freezes.
Or the keyboard starts glitching and lagging 3 seconds behind your typing.
Yeah. You get so frustrated and you think, the software on this phone is garbage. The apps are broken. The operating system is full of bugs. I need to take this in and get the whole thing wiped and reinstalled.
But the software isn't the problem at all. The code is flawless.
Right, the apps are fine. The fatal flaw is that the degraded, failing lithium-ion battery can no longer output the smooth, consistent, high voltage required for the processor to actually run that complex software. The hardware is actively failing the software.
And we do this to ourselves constantly. We think our minds are fundamentally broken.
We think we have deep psychological flaws. We think we need to analyze our childhood traumas for 10 years in therapy, when sometimes what we actually need as a first step is to fix our failing metabolic battery. We need to sleep 8 hours, we need to eat whole foods, we need to get some sunlight in our eyes in the morning, and we need to move our bodies to literally physically heal the mitochondria.
It reveals how deeply, inextricably intertwined our physical health and our mental state truly are. The mind and the body are not two separate domains separated by the neck. They are a single, continuous, highly sensitive metabolic ecosystem.
Healing the mind almost always requires healing the metabolic battery first.
You have to give the physical brain the massive amounts of clean energy it requires to do the incredibly hard work of emotional regulation and cognitive change.
Okay, so let's say a listener takes this to heart. They start prioritizing their sleep, they manage their lifestyle, they stop eating junk, and they slowly start getting that metabolic battery charged back up.
The hardware is finally stabilizing.
The voltage is smooth. Now, how do we actually go about fixing the glitching software? How do we change the actual stressful thoughts, the anger, and the rapid reactions that have become our default settings over decades of habit? Because having a charged battery doesn't automatically mean you know how to use the apps.
Right. This moves us out of the realm of biology and energy and right into the realm of conscious thought and internal dialogue.
Which is where it gets really practical.
Exactly. This is where we introduce a deeply powerful, transformative concept for navigating our internal world. It is the concept of the choice map. I want you to imagine that your mind is a vast landscape, and in every single moment of your waking life, you are standing at a crossroads.
Every situation you encounter, an email from your boss, a comment from your spouse, a delay in traffic places you directly at this intersection.
And from this crossroads, there are essentially only two primary paths you can walk down.
Two distinct mindsets that dictate everything that happens next.
Precisely. One path is the judger mindset. The other path is the learner mindset. And the path you take is entirely 100% determined by the specific internal questions you ask yourself in that split second of reaction.
Let's put this into a visceral, everyday scenario so we can see how the mechanism actually works. Let's go right back to that frustrating morning commute. You are already tense. The steering wheel is digging into your hands.
And suddenly, a massive SUV violently swerves into your lane without a blinker, cutting you off so closely that you have to slam both feet on the brakes.
Your coffee spills all over the center console. Your heart leaps into your throat. You are at the crossroads.
If you take the judger path, which is the automatic, deeply ingrained default for the vast majority of us, your internal monologue instantly starts firing off a specific, highly predictable set of questions.
It sounds like, why are people such absolute idiots? Why does this always happen to me when I'm in a rush? What is fundamentally wrong with that guy? Whose fault is this?
I want you to notice the inherent nature of those questions. They are rigid. They are focused entirely on blame, on establishing yourself as the victim, and on asserting moral superiority over the other driver.
But critically, asking those specific judger questions isn't just a mental exercise. It triggers an immediate, cascading physiological mechanism in your physical body.
I can feel it just talking about it.
Yeah, the shoulders hike right back up to the ears. Your jaw clenches so hard, your back teeth actually ache. Your breathing becomes shallow, trapped right in the top of your chest, depriving your brain of oxygen. Your fists clench the wheel again.
You have just initiated a full-blown amygdala hijack. The amygdala is the ancient, primitive threat detection center in your brain. By asking judger questions, your conscious mind is signaling to the amygdala that this traffic incident is a literal, physical threat to your survival.
It floods your systemic circulation with cortisol and adrenaline, your blood pressure spikes, your digestion stops.
And remember our discussion about mitochondria. This massive sudden stress response severely damages your metabolic battery. It rapidly drains your cellular ATP just to maintain this state of muscular fury.
You are burning precious metabolic fuel to be angry at a complete stranger who is already a mile down the road.
And it leaves you feeling completely exhausted and depleted by 9 a.m. before you've even started working.
But there is another path, the learner path. What does that actually look like when you've just been terrified and cut off in traffic?
If you force yourself to take the learner path, the internal questions shift dramatically. Instead of blame, you intentionally ask questions rooted in curiosity, expansion, and reality.
Okay, what just happened? I got cut off. What are my choices right now? Is the other driver okay, or are they rushing to a hospital emergency? What is actually useful about this situation?
It sounds almost radically, unbelievably calm, but here is the biological mechanism of why it works. Asking those specific, complex learner questions requires heavy cognitive processing.
It physically forces blood flow up into the prefrontal cortex, right?
Yes, the logical, advanced, regulating part of your brain behind your forehead. When the prefrontal cortex engages to answer a complex question, it sends an inhibitory chemical signal down to the amygdala.
It basically tells the alarm bell to shut off.
Because the amygdala calms down, your body remains calm. Your breathing stays deep. Your heart rate slows. You maintain access to your full cognitive capacity, and most importantly, you navigate the stressful situation without draining your metabolic battery.
I understand the underlying theory, and the biology makes sense, but hold on. I have to express some serious doubt here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Because I can hear people listening to this, sitting in their cars or at their desk and rolling their eyes. Let's be entirely realistic. When you are at work and a toxic client is screaming at you over the phone, or your boss is unfairly blaming you for a project failure you had nothing to do with, taking a deep, cleansing breath and internally asking, what can I learn from this lovely person who is currently trying to ruin my career, feels utterly fake.
Oh, totally.
It feels impossible. Frankly, it feels a bit like toxic positivity, like you are gaslighting yourself into accepting abuse.
That is an incredibly valid, common concern. And the crucial thing to understand is that the goal of the learner mindset is not to become some unfeeling, passive saint who enjoys being mistreated or never gets angry.
Anger is a valid human emotion.
We are all what we call recovering judgers. I fall headfirst into the judger pit every single day. The goal isn't immediate perfection. The goal is neuroplasticity.
Neuroplasticity. The brain's miraculous physical ability to wire and rewire its own physical connections based on repeated experiences.
Exactly. Let's use an analogy of a physical landscape. Right now, because you've practiced it for decades, your neural pathway for the judger response, the instant anger, the blame, is like a massive 8-lane, freshly paved superhighway.
It's fast, there is no friction, and your electrical thoughts travel down it completely automatically.
The learner pathway, on the other hand, is like a tiny, overgrown, thorny hiking trail in the middle of a dense forest. It is incredibly hard to find, and it takes massive effort to walk down it.
So when you are getting screamed at by your boss, it feels fake to take the learner path because you literally, biologically, haven't built the neural infrastructure for it yet.
Exactly. It takes massive, exhausting cognitive effort to hack your way through those mental weeds. Your brain wants to take the highway.
So how do we actually do it?
This is where we introduce the most vital, practical tool in this entire framework: the switching lane. You cannot magically teleport from the 8-lane judger highway directly over to the learner trail. You have to actively, consciously cross over using the switching lane.
And the toll required to enter that lane is activating your observer self.
The observer self.
What does it actually mean in the heat of a frustrating moment?
It means cultivating the distinct ability to step back just for a fraction of a second and watch yourself reacting as if you were a third party. You have to notice the physical, bodily cues of your anger, the tight jaw, the shallow breath, the sudden heat in your face, but you must notice them without judgment.
You can't get mad at yourself for being mad.
Right, you just observe, I notice my fists are clenched, I notice my heart is racing.
Okay, so I notice the physical signs of the amygdala hijack. Then what do I do?
You pause. You force yourself to take one deliberate, deep, diaphragmatic breath. That physical act disrupts the physiological stress loop, and then you ask a switching question.
This is a question designed specifically to act as a speed bump, to jolt your brain out of the automatic judger track.
Give me an example of a switching question.
The most powerful one is simply, am I in judger right now? Just acknowledge where you are. Then ask, is this state of anger how I actually want to feel for the next 3 hours? Where would I rather be? How else can I choose to interpret this situation?
These questions act like a cognitive crowbar, prying your rigid mind open just enough to see that you have a choice in how to proceed.
And tying this back to neuroplasticity and the biology of the brain, every single time you do this, you are changing the physical structure of your mind. Let's talk about myelin, because that is the secret sauce here.
Oh, myelin is fascinating.
Myelin is a fatty substance, a sheath, that wraps around the axons of your neurons. It acts exactly like the rubber insulation on a copper electrical wire. The thicker the myelin sheath, the faster and more effortlessly the electrical signal travels down that specific pathway.
That is the biological mechanism of habit. Every single time you activate that observer self, every single time you notice your jaw clenching, take a deep breath and ask, am I in judger? You are taking a machete to that overgrown hiking trail.
You are clearing the path.
But more importantly, you are signaling to your brain's helper cells, the oligodendrocytes, to start wrapping new layers of myelin around that specific learner-neural connection. It requires conscious, difficult, clunky effort at first. It will absolutely feel artificial and fake.
But over time, through sheer repetition, you lay down more and more myelin. That thorny hiking trail becomes a dirt road, then a paved road, and eventually, after months of practice, it becomes the new superhighway.
Your default setting physically, anatomically shifts from automatic rage to automatic curiosity.
That is a deeply empowering realization. It means we aren't just stuck with our toxic reactions. We are actively carving the physical landscape of our brains with every single internal question we ask ourselves.
But it requires so much conscious effort.
It really does. How do we make that learner mindset our automatic default, so we don't have to work so hard, sweating and hacking through the weeds every single time someone annoys us? How do we program the deeper automatic layers of our minds?
To do that, we have to look far beneath the surface ripples of conscious thought. We have to talk about programming the immense power of the subconscious mind. Because the reality that surprises most people is that the conscious mind, the part of you that is listening to my voice, the part that sets goals, that decides to use the choice map, that genuinely wants to be a calmer person, is relatively weak.
Right. It only controls about 10% of our daily decisions, behaviors, and reactions.
10%. That is almost nothing.
That means we are on autopilot most of the day. So what is running the other massive 90%?
The other 90% is run entirely by pre-installed automatic subconscious programs. Think of your mind like a massive ocean-faring ship. Your conscious mind is the captain standing up on the bridge.
He has the map. He sets the destination.
He says, we are going to sail to a calmer, happier, more productive place today. But the captain doesn't actually turn the massive propellers. The subconscious mind is the dark, cavernous engine room below decks, filled with massive automated machinery actually doing the heavy lifting to get the ship moving.
If the captain sets a conscious course for happiness, but the engines below deck are deeply programmed by past trauma to only steer toward anxiety, victimhood, and conflict, the ship is going to crash. The engine room always overpowers the bridge.
So if the conscious mind is just shouting orders that the engine room ignores, how do we actually get down into the dark and rewrite the code on those machines?
We have to understand the specific mechanism of how the subconscious filters reality. Right now, in this very second, your brain is being bombarded by millions of bits of sensory information.
The temperature of the air, the hum of the refrigerator, the feeling of your clothes against your skin, background traffic, thousands of visual details.
If your conscious mind had to actively process all 11 million bits of data per second, you would go completely insane in 5 minutes. It would be a fatal system overload.
So the brain evolved a built-in filter, a highly efficient bouncer standing at the door of your conscious awareness. Anatomically, it is a bundle of nerves located at the brainstem. It is called the reticular activating system, or the RAS.
The brain's internal search algorithm.
Exactly. The RAS filters out 99.9% of that sensory information, so only the most important stuff gets through to your conscious awareness. But here's the million-dollar question. Who decides what is important?
You do, by what you repeatedly choose to focus on.
So the algorithm just obeys whatever you feed it.
That is the profound terrifying truth of the RAS. The brain's algorithm responds with a resounding, unquestioning yes to whatever thought, belief, or fear dominates your mind.
It is a completely neutral mechanism. It does not judge whether the thought is good or bad, helpful or destructive, happy or miserable. It just obeys the programming.
So if I wake up and my dominant looping thought is, everything always goes wrong for me, people at work are out to get me, today's going to be terrible. The RAS hears that and says, understood. The boss wants to see threats and misery, programming the visual and auditory filters to only find evidence of how terrible things are.
Yes. And suddenly your reality warps to match that expectation. You don't even consciously notice the person politely holding the door for you, or the beautiful sunrise, or the genuine compliment from a coworker.
Your RAS literally, physically filters all of that positive sensory data out before it ever reaches your conscious mind, because it contradicts your dominant programmed belief.
Instead, it highlights and magnifies every minor annoyance. The slow driver, the cold coffee, the typo in an email, a slightly ambiguous tone from your boss to prove to your conscious mind that you were right all along.
You literally create a self-fulfilling prophecy of misery, not through magic, but through neurological filtering.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we interact with a digital, externalized version of this exact neurological mechanism every single day.
It's exactly like a social media algorithm on your phone. If I am scrolling through my feed and I stop and linger on a video of people screaming at each other in a parking lot, or some hyper-partisan outrage bait news story, even just for 3 seconds, what happens?
The algorithm silently registers that attention as engagement.
Exactly. The algorithm doesn't care if I like the video or if it made my blood pressure spike.
Yeah.
It just says, oh, they spent time looking at conflict and outrage. Let's serve them more of that.
And within an hour, your entire feed is a toxic, stressful nightmare of screaming people and terrible news.
And if I want to change that feed, I can't just sit there passively hoping the app decides to show me nicer things. I have to deliberately, actively search for positive content. I have to search for videos of puppies or baking tutorials or people helping each other and watch them all the way through.
You have to force the digital algorithm to learn a brand new pattern.
Our physical brain is doing the exact same thing with our moment-to-moment reality.
That is a flawless analogy for the RAS. You have to actively, stubbornly engage with what you want to experience in the world. Otherwise, the default primitive algorithm will just keep serving you your old anxieties and fears.
But how do we actually program it? A lot of people mistake passive daydreaming for programming. Daydreaming is just wishing I wish I was less stressed. I wish I had a better job. The subconscious engine room does not respond to passive low-energy wishing.
So what does the engine room actually respond to? How do we write the code?
It responds only to true, intense commitment. And commitment requires aligning your conscious thoughts, your physical feelings, and your deeply held beliefs into a single, cohesive laser beam of intent.
You must vividly imagine the goal, yes. But more importantly, you must physically feel the emotional intensity of already having achieved it in your body.
Why is the physical emotion so vital to the programming process? Why isn't a logical thought enough?
Because the subconscious mind, the ancient part of your brain, cannot distinguish between a real external event happening right now and a vividly imagined, highly emotional internal visualization.
Really? It literally can't tell the difference.
No, it can't. If you sit quietly, close your eyes, and vividly imagine walking into your stressful workplace feeling incredibly calm, confident, and untouchable, and you actually summon the physical feeling of that deep peace in your chest, your heart rate slows, your shoulders drop, your subconscious actually believes that peace is happening right now in reality.
It starts firing those neurons. It starts laying down myelin on those pathways. It programs the RAS to start looking for opportunities in your environment to be confident and calm.
You are literally installing the new software code through the medium of emotional intensity.
It is about creating the reality internally, building the neural architecture before you ever step out into it externally. And this profound internal programming doesn't just affect how we feel sitting alone in our living rooms. It dramatically, radically alters our external world.
Specifically, how we relate to ourselves and how we interact with other people. Which brings us to the ultimate application of all this neurological hardware and software, the ultimate relationship.
Everything we've discussed so far, the biological engine of the mitochondria, the internal choice map questions, the subconscious filtering of the RAS, it all culminates in how we project ourselves into the world and connect with others.
And to frame this properly, we need to look at a stunning breakdown of human happiness that psychological researchers have compiled over decades of study. They looked at thousands of people to determine what actually dictates our baseline level of well-being.
The happiness equation.
Yes. The rigorously tested research suggests that about 50% of our baseline happiness is determined entirely by our genetics. The biological hardware we discussed earlier.
Some people are just born with a sunnier disposition, more efficient oxytocin receptors, a slightly more robust, resilient metabolic engine.
That feels a little deterministic, a bit heavy. But okay, 50% is baked in at birth. What about the rest? Society constantly tells us that if we just get the massive raise or buy the huge house or find the absolutely perfect, flawless partner, we will finally be happy.
And that is the great, exhausting illusion of modern life. The research shows that external circumstances, your specific income level, your marital status, your impressive job title, whether you live in a mansion or an apartment, only account for about 10% of your overall variance in happiness. 10%.
That is a staggering statistic. We spend our entire lives violently stressing out, destroying our health, ruining our sleep, just chasing things that only move the needle by 10%. We are on a hedonic treadmill, running to exhaustion for a 10% bump.
Because we completely ignore the remaining 40%. That massive untapped 40% chunk is entirely based on our internal attitude, our intentional daily activities, and the conscious choices we make about how to interpret the world around us.
That is where we have immense life-changing power. We control the 40%. And the most significant arena where we exercise that 40%, where we use our learner mindsets and our programmed RAS, is in our relationships with others.
This is where we get into the concept of mere relationships. I'll warn you, listening right now, this is a very confronting, uncomfortable idea for a lot of people to sit with.
It is highly confronting because it strips away all our excuses and requires absolute, unvarnished self-honesty. The concept proposes that our relationships, especially the difficult ones, act as profound, revealing mirrors.
The specific traits, behaviors, and actions that trigger us the most intensely in other people, the things that make us instantly furious, deeply judgmental, or incredibly annoyed, are almost always unhealed wounds, deeply buried insecurities, or subconscious negative programs within ourselves that we absolutely refuse to acknowledge.
Let's use a highly relatable sensory example for this so we can feel it. Imagine you are scrolling through social media late at night, or you are at a dinner party, and you see a colleague who just got a massive, highly publicized promotion.
Or you see a couple who seems incredibly, authentically happy and deeply in love. What is your immediate, visceral, physical reaction before your logical brain kicks in?
Does your chest suddenly tighten? Do you feel that sour, hot prickle of envy in the pit of your stomach? Do you immediately, automatically try to find a flaw in them to bring them down a peg in your own mind?
Oh, she only got that promotion because she relentlessly plays office politics and kisses up to the boss.
That immediate reaction, that flash of envy and judgment, is incredibly revealing of your internal programming. When you feel envy or resentment towards someone else's success or joy, you are sending a powerful, destructive signal to your own subconscious algorithm, your RAS.
You're reinforcing a state of lack.
Yeah.
You're telling your brain that success, that wealth, that love is over there. It belongs to them, is separate from me, and it does not belong in my reality.
And remember the rule of the RAS. The algorithm always says yes. Your brain will literally ensure you remain separate from that success because you have programmed it to view that success as a foreign negative trigger.
But what if you intentionally shift the reaction? What if you use the observer self, catch the envy, and shift into the learner path?
What if you see that happy couple or that promoted coworker and you intentionally cultivate a feeling of expansive, genuine joy for them? Your chest opens up, your breathing relaxes, you smile, and you truly think how wonderful that they have found that success. Good for them.
That is the ultimate master-level hack for the subconscious mind. When you feel genuine, unforced joy for someone else's abundance, you signal to your brain that this abundance is a natural, welcome part of your reality. You normalize it.
You tell your RAS, we like this, we align with this energy. Look for more opportunities to bring this into our lives. You actually open the physical neural pathways to manifest that very same state of success or love for yourself because you stop treating it as a threat.
I'm having a hard time fully accepting this, honestly, because it is a profoundly bitter pill to swallow, to realize that my righteous, justified anger at my coworker's arrogance or my intense annoyance at my neighbor's flashy new car is actually a mirror reflecting my own deep-seated insecurities and my own hidden feelings of inadequacy.
It is so much easier and so much more comfortable to just say they are a jerk than to look inward and say, what is currently broken or unhealed in me that their success causes me physical pain?
It is a bitter pill, absolutely. But it is the necessary medicine required for real, lasting psychological transformation. And the reason it is so incredibly hard to swallow is because of the loudest voice in our heads, the ego.
The ego, the ultimate ever-present judger.
The ego is the psychological construct in our minds that thrives entirely on separation. It needs to feel distinct from others to survive. It feeds on constant comparison, on feeling slighted, on being right at all costs, and on proving others wrong.
When you feel that hot flash of envy at a dinner party, that is simply the ego frantically trying to protect its fragile sense of self by tearing someone else down.
So how do we deal with it? We can't surgically remove it. How do we silence that loud, demanding, insecure voice that constantly wants us to be bitter, separated, and exhausted?
You silence the ego through extreme presence and profound, radical self-love. When you are fully, completely present in the current moment, when you are not dwelling on past grievances or projecting anxious scenarios into the future, the ego simply cannot survive.
It requires the fuel of the past and the future to weave its complex narratives of victimhood.
And when you cultivate genuine self-love, you no longer desperately need the external validation of being better or more successful than someone else. You stop comparing your messy behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's highly curated highlight reel.
You realize, on a cellular level, that their light and their success does not diminish yours in any way. When the ego is finally silenced, genuine human connection and a true, enduring learner mindset become entirely possible.
So, what does this all mean? Let's bring all these incredible threads together. We have gone on a massive, profound journey today. We started by looking at the hard, undeniable biological constraints of the brain.
The iron rod destroying the railway workers' frontal lobe, the missing neurochemical receptors dictating the love lives of voles, the devastating tragedy of trying to force a blank slate identity onto a child. We firmly established that the hardware is real, it is powerful, and it dictates much of our baseline.
But then we saw how that physical hardware is actually powered, the metabolic engine. The microscopic mitochondria that act as traffic directors, constantly sensing our environment and dictating whether we feel vibrant, clear, and calm, or exhausted, depressed, and panicked.
We learned the crucial lesson that the mind and body are not separate. They are a single, highly reactive ecosystem.
And most importantly, we learned the mechanics of how we are not trapped. The software can be actively rewritten.
We can stand at the crossroads of the choice map in traffic, and we can use our observer self to switch from the toxic, energy-draining judger path to the curious, expansive learner path. By doing so, we physically calm the amygdala and save our cellular energy.
We can use the emotional intensity of our imagination to program our subconscious engine room, training our internal RAS filter to seek out opportunity and joy instead of threat and misery.
We can look deeply into the mirror of our difficult relationships, silence the demanding ego, and consciously choose joy over envy. We are this profound, miraculous intersection of biology and conscious thought.
Our physical cells power our thoughts, but remarkably, our conscious thoughts and the specific questions we ask ourselves can physically rewire those very cells, lay down new myelin, and fundamentally alter the reality we experience.
That is the ultimate, most hopeful reflection on human potential. We are not static monuments carved permanently in stone by our genetics. We are not helpless, passive victims of our past programming, our traumas, or our neurochemistry.
We are highly dynamic, constantly regenerating, brilliant ecosystems. We possess an extraordinary built-in biological capacity for transformation, the power to change the entire trajectory of our lives, to heal our minds and bodies, is literally woven into the physical structure of our brains, waiting for us to take the wheel.
So what does this all mean for you? Tomorrow morning, that electric alarm clock is going to buzz aggressively in the dark again. Your bare feet are going to hit that freezing cold floor. You are going to get in your car, grip the steering wheel, and face the exact same frustrating traffic.
The external circumstances of your morning won't magically change just because you listen to this. The traffic will still be there.
But you can change. Because if your internal questions, your learner mindset, and your daily focus are literally physically shaping the architecture of your brain and dictating the reality your subconscious allows you to walk into tomorrow, what is the very next question you're going to ask yourself when this audio ends?